You've read the title, you know what it's going to be about. We're going to be discussing the topics that aren't really mentioned in any other LD videos and talking about kind of the less cool, less sexy side of level design and what you need to consider if you want to progress through your career. So without further ado, we're just going to jump straight into it. Hey everyone, I hope you're well, playing on and making the games that you all love. You're joining me, your host, Max Pears, professional principal level designer. Absolute pleasure to be chatting with you all. Today, thank you for taking time out of your day, whether this is morning, evening, or night, and I hope that your families are all safe as well. So thank you for joining me. I was trying to think about a topic, right? Because as I mentioned in not necessarily the previous one, it might be the previous one or the one before, I'm talking about, well, what? I'm not necessarily running out of topic. Well, I guess, yes, running out of topics and thinking, what else can this podcast talk about, right? There's a lot of elements that we've covered. And not just me, there's some incredible other resources out there, which we constantly share throughout the months as well. And I just thought to myself, do you know what? It's the topics that people aren't talking about, which will help you progress through your career, but really aren't the fun side when people think about level design, or really just the great part of making games. And when I say the least fun part, the least sexy side, it's not to detract from their value. Their value is really important, but it's just not necessarily the element that you think about or really want to do when you think about making levels, right? And we've talked a bit about research references and all that, and I've seen plenty of people who still don't enjoy doing that element of it, which is a real shame, to be honest, because it just makes your levels better.
But first, let's have a quick word from today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is none other than me. What I've done, everyone, and I hope you're excited for this, is I've actually created a level design kind of store. What I've done in this store is put up different kinds of tips and tricks that you can find there, whether that be my actual ebook itself to that of level design pamphlets focused on different things such as traversal, stealth, breaking into the industry, as well as different talks that I have done which you cannot find anywhere else other than on this store. So if you are looking to improve on your level design skills and processes, then check out the Level Design Store, which will be down in the description below, where there'll be a link to find this. All you need to do is head over to gumroad.com/level design lobby. I hope you like what you see, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you, and now back to the show.
But when people keep asking, and I've found it in my career about, well, what makes the difference from, say, junior or intermediate to senior, right? And there's a few things that come with that. Now, really, in my mind, the junior to intermediate is more about your strength in terms of skill and delivering your levels not only to a high standard, but also on a good time frame as well. Because when you're a junior or associate, you really are given a bit of extra time, which is perfectly fine. And you're also, hopefully, I would like to believe, very much mentored and given more feedback. Or sometimes when you're at that kind of senior principal level, you will still get feedback, but it's more when it comes to reviews versus that of having a scheduled time. Now, obviously, make sure that you are still getting feedback. Do ask other people to check out your work, but there's more trust, shall we say, given that. That's the big thing. And as I said, that time and planning. So I think that's the first one, because that's really important throughout it all, is planning and timing. I think the funniest one for me is shout out to Manny Diaz. When I first joined Ubisoft, and he's like, okay, how long do you think this task will take? I've never had someone ask me that question before, and I was always like, and I gave him like a really long estimation. He's like, do you think? And I was like, yeah, because I didn't necessarily know in my time frame what's long or not. Like, is a week too long for certain tasks? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And for me, it was then he asked us about another task, and I gave too short of an answer, and he's just like, you don't know what you can do with this bit, do you, mate? And it was a really funny one, and luckily he made me feel like, okay, it's not the worst, but I had to think about it, right? I had to really understand the systems, and I think that's a really important part to this aspect when you are giving estimations, is understanding the tools that you have first and foremost. As with the example I gave there, the reason I felt very much out of touch was, one, I didn't necessarily know the pipeline super well, but two, I wasn't really equipped or understood the engine at the time. So if you are using tools that you, say, for example, haven't used before, and give yourself a little bit of extra time, right? Now, it depends per tool, right? If it's, say, for example, switching over from PowerPoint to Miro, as a lot of studios now have, or Notion. Well, Notion is a little bit different. It's pretty easy to use. But Miro, for example, which again, easier to use for sure, but give yourself just a little bit of time, maybe just an extra hour or so, a couple hours to help with it. Versus, say, if it's a new aspect of an engine you've not used before, maybe it's new scripting tools, or you're having to use animation and stuff because you're creating like placeholder animations, then give yourself like an extra maybe day or something for that. That way, again, you've thought about it and got more buffer. But if you understand the tools, if you know how to use them, then that's better for it. Another way to learn about kind of estimations is by learning from your senior members of staff. Understand how long it'll take them, and then you can pretty much give yourself an extra day on top. Because the fact that you're less experienced, and there's nothing wrong with that when I say that, that's not an insult, that is just the fact of it. And also, that gives you way more time to learn. So think about that. Ask the questions or to your seniors, how long do they expect it to take? Add yourself an extra day or two and go from there. That way you're in the same ballpark, but also people understand and respect it because of the level of seniority for that. And planning isn't necessarily just talking to your leads or your producer. It can also be done through that stuff of Jira, which is, again, one of the, I think there's another one, I've forgotten what it's called, Azure or something, I believe, which is another one that other studios may use. And man, that is, for me, definitely not my least favorite part, but it is a really important part to make sure when you're giving those estimations that you're logging time on this as well, right? It is, again, something that's just like, really? Because you don't necessarily want to think about these elements while you're trying to make stuff, because sometimes there's just so much pressure on you to create. But a trick that I can't remember who told me it, but just something to remind yourself, set yourself an alert through your email system that sets a reminder to log your work at the end of the day, or have it on your phone. An element like that where you actually remind yourself will help make sure it becomes a habit. Because although it's not fun and sometimes it's annoying to do, it is a helpful job for the producers and your lead as well, so they can make better estimations and understand where some bottlenecks are and what's worth growing from. I think that's one. Again, it's definitely, you mentioned anyone about Jira unless they're a producer, like, geez Louise, it is just mind-numbing to look at times, but it is important, as I said. And when you start doing elements like that, that will start to show your experience and understanding of the overall process, the overall pipeline that people are asking and thinking about when they're looking at people to get promoted. I know it's not part of the whole element of actually making levels, which again really is not always the best for measurement, sadly, because other people do look at different aspects. I think the second part is documentation. Now, we talked about Miro just there, for example. There's been a huge switch that I've seen coming around. As I said, with me being freelance, I've worked with many companies now, and everyone's definitely starting to make the switch, if not to Miro, then to Notion, or Milanote is another one as well, to keep the documentation alive. And managing documentation is definitely one of the hardest and definitely one of the most debated parts, I think, when it comes to that of games, right? Because the counterpoint of not doing documentation comes from that element of, well, the game changes so fast, things get forgotten, it's not up to date, some of these elements are really hard to find, or that you've got conflicting documents because someone's left or someone's taken over this and they haven't removed previous documents, right? So managing documentation and documenting certain elements is really, really crucial. I'm a huge fan of documentation. I think freelancing is definitely one of the hardest aspects when you join, and because the people making requests are so used to working with their teammates, and me coming as a contractor from the outside for a certain period of time, they tend not to share the documentation because they think you understand it because they're so used to that conversation. But documentation allows me to get a quick understanding of the overall game if, say, something's not at a playable stage yet. Like, if you can play it, it's much easier to understand, right? But if it's not, then God, yeah, like, you need that. So make sure that you are asking about it. Make sure that you're taking responsibility if it's logged or given the task to make documentation. And if you find something cool and interesting, make the documentation and then share it out with the rest of your team. Because the more that you can do of that, again, it'll show you taking responsibility as well as communicating in a far better and far more interesting aspect from that, right? And I think that's always an important one to share for it. Or, for example, there's always, well, not always, good to have reviews after certain milestones, right? Where you get to just talk about what the process is. And if you get some feedback telling, hey, you haven't done this, we didn't know about this aspect, well, then that's a chance for you to shine, to add to your documentation and give this and hand this out to keep everyone in the loop, right? So I would definitely make sure that's an important one. And with the other documentation, this is the second thing. Now, this is a time versus reward kind of aspect, right? Well, you have to think about that in terms of what's more important, getting the information or keeping that of the viewer's retention, right? As we get so many emails a day, so many documents a day. I remember on Cyberpunk, geez Louise, that was just constant. I think you'd receive almost 100 emails a day at certain parts, if not more. So many different documents, but God, were some of them just boring to read. So having elements like GIFs in and great pictures, diagrams, these will keep these far more engaged and also make people understand what you're trying to express. The second thing when you're doing documentation is explain to it as if you'd explain to a child, as if someone had never picked up this document. What you'll find, especially if the documentation is done by programmers, is that they will skip a few things because in terms of steps, because the fact that they expect you to be on their level of understanding the systems, which is normally not the case because programmers are very smart people. And I think that's really important. If there's a drop-down menu, include it. Make sure you show where in the drop-down menu that aspect is. Really take your time with that. Because if something's clear, it's going to save you time in the long run. Because trust me, if someone doesn't understand that document, you're going to get a message and you're going to have time taken out of your day. So make that as clear as possible and entertaining as possible. And that way, again, not you showing that you can do documentation, but you can make great documents. God, like, I think I've banged on this podcast about documents with just, white background, black text, just how dull that is. Same with portfolios. And the reason I express that is we're making games, right? Games are supposed to be this, depending on what you're making, but generally a very fun experience for the end user. So making and reading the book of Iwata, one of the former heads over at Nintendo, who passed away a few years ago. In his book, he brought the point of like, we make fun games, so why can't making games be fun? And I think if you're willing to show that again in documentation, have some fun aspects in it, well, man, then that's great. If you've read some of my articles, I'll include GIFs in it or links to funny GIFs at certain moments because it's supposed to break it up, right, for the most part. What we're talking about when constructing levels and breaking them down is, it's quite, unless you love level design, it can be quite a dull topic. So breaking it up and making it engaging and eye-catching is just generally important. So think about that aspect again of documentation for it.
At Lover Design Lobby, we believe everybody has a story to tell. Hobbyist or student, freelancer or veteran, we made it our mission to unite those who share our passion for creating and developing great games. Thanks to our generous Patreon backers, we've been able to do just that. So if you've already pledged your support, thank you. If not, you too can ensure the future of Level Design Lobby, helping us to create even more exciting content, collaborations, interviews, and much more. With awesome perks and rewards, whether you're a seasoned professional or just getting started, you're sure to find something for you. Want to share tips, tricks, and advice with passionate, like-minded developers? Our awesome community Discord has you covered. Fancy practicing your level design, creating strong portfolio content, and having fun? Then try our level design weekends. Or perhaps you want to individually discuss your work, hone your skills, or level up your career? Then consider our one-on-one mentorships. If you share our vision, then go to patreon.com/Level Design Lobby for more information and to pledge your support. Thank you.
Next one, meetings and notes, right? Many of us who are listening to this, getting into games, aspire to be that of lead or director level one day, right? And I will tell you this now again, I've not hit director level. I've not necessarily been a lead, but I'm principal now. And I'll tell you this, the higher you get, the more meetings that you are dragged into. And personally, like, meetings are very hard to keep your focus all the time, and especially keep you engaged, because sometimes you are invited to these meetings and you don't know why. Another thing is you can have back-to-back meetings, but you need to make sure that you hold yourself high in that. Make sure you're paying attention. Sometimes things will slip past you, but that's okay. But take notes. I've always made that very crucial. That was really drilled into my head back when I was at Ubisoft. When I went to go to a meeting, I didn't have my notepad, and my tech lead, Scoop, sent me back to my desk, and he's like, don't come back until you've got your notepad. And that happened more times than once. That's really important. And I think I'll give the example as well, is we had a review once at CD Projekt Red, and this was the one that I thought was not dumb on the juniors part, but really disappointed in the so-called seniors on this. We were all asked to go around the juniors and review his work, which I'm not necessarily a fan of, because you're now taking up 4 people's time. And the other thing is, what you'll find amongst those 4 designers, myself included in that, we all have different ways of designing, right? And not necessarily a bad thing in that, but you're going to get conflicting feedback for that. So it's really important to kind of, you'll either be, or hopefully you'll be assigned just one mentor, or pick a mentor for that. Doesn't mean you can't ask other people the questions to learn from that. But if you've got kind of one guiding light, you'll kind of get more of a consistent feedback, so you know the aspects that are a bit more reviewed versus people talking over each other, contradicting one another. And all the way through the meeting, I noticed the junior was not writing down notes at all. And I just said, mate, how are you remembering this? And then one of the seniors, a friend of mine, was like, oh, well, he normally gets them all done anyway, Max. And I said, how would you know? You're not going to remember everything you said to him. And it was a real important point of, again, make sure you write notes. And every time we were in a meeting after that, I kept asking him, have you got your notes? And again, it can come across a bit annoying for me to ask that. But the reason I'm asking that is there's so much that go on in meetings, right? Sometimes some things that affect us, and sometimes something that doesn't. But you don't know what's necessarily going to be the vital information until we're there. And there's a lot of information coming and going throughout this meeting. Some where suggestions are taken on and moved forward, and other ones where it's just forgotten about completely, right? So really taking notes on that aspect for it is really crucial for us all, because the more that we have in terms of information, the more that we can contribute as well, not only in feedback to our work, but contribute to the meeting itself, because you might take it on and go, oh, well, actually, that's going to cause a problem because of X, Y, and Z. So be present in the meeting, take notes in the meeting, and try pay attention. I know that sometimes it's going to be hard, especially if we've got back-to-back. There are some days where I've had 4-hour meetings, 3.5-hour meetings, and trust me, I am losing my focus throughout, because it's tough to stay fully active and fully on, but really pay attention. Get yourself involved, raise your hand, ask questions. Because the more questions you ask, the more the answers you're going to get. But people are going to notice that as well. So really pay attention towards that. So get involved. It will help. And again, people will appreciate that. Again, another point what I'd say is after we get involved, try to encourage others to be involved as well. That's another great thing that people will respect as well, because sometimes you'll find it can be the same 4 or 5 people talking in these meetings, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But you want to get everyone involved because everyone has an opinion. So try figure out ways to encourage people throughout that. Ask them questions. Say, oh, what's your opinion on this? Insert name here. The more that you have from that, the better I think it'll be overall for you, mate. So really take that time with it to get people involved, pay attention, take notes within meetings for that one. And taking leadership as well. If you want to advance throughout your career, you want to make sure that you're able to take charge in these meetings and spend time growing in these points, right? I think it's really crucial for that. So again, it doesn't mean talk over or undermine anyone, but you can put your own meetings together to show that as well. The more that you can get involved in these things, the better, again, it can overall achieve for a team. So that's another aspect, I think, for it. So we've talked about estimations and Jira. We talked about that of meetings with note-taking, getting others involved, paying attention. Documentation, we've discussed documentation too. Yeah, I think that's the main ones for now. We can save more for part 2. But there's a lot more to level design than just making the levels, really, is my point. Oh yeah, I already have other ones already. Pipeline and metrics, which we'll talk about as well next time. So yeah, those are the main ones for a team. I hope this has been quite an interesting one to hear, because I think it's not always clear when people are trying to get promoted, when people want to improve, right? And I think the more that we have an understanding of, well, it's not just about making great levels. Sometimes you'll find your leads aren't necessarily the best LDs, and that's no disrespect to your leads, because they have other skills that make them incredible leads. So with this kind of little series, we'll do a part 2. You can start to understand what helps make you a great level designer and what can help you improve on your own skills. So thank you very much. If you have liked this show, please leave a thumbs up, 5-star review, wherever you can leave some feedback. This will help bring attention, bring eyes to the podcast. Do make sure you subscribe, again, wherever that's YouTube, Spotify, the iPad podcast, and wherever you get your great podcasts from. And if you want to ask me any other questions, please hit me up on Twitter, which is @MaxPairs. You can email into the show at leveldesignlobby@gmail.com. So thank you, everyone. Take care, and I'll catch you all next time.